I've been playing Tower Fantasy for about a few hours now, and I'll talk about what's good and what's bad about the game, coming from someone who has played a lot of Honkai and Genshin. I'll compare Tower Fantasy to both those games. So, yeah, let's get started. So, the few good things the game has is the pity system and the characters not being tied to their playstyle. The good thing about the pity that I really like is that you have a hard pity at 80 pulls that even if you get, say, an SSR at within 10 pulls, you still have the hard pity of 80 pulls. So on your 80th pull, you're guaranteed an SSR no matter what. So yeah, I really do like that. Of course, I'm not exactly sure about the pity yet on like rate ups and guarantees, but if I'll play the game long enough, maybe I'll talk about it. But right now, as I don't care about really getting any characters. I think the PD system's very good. I think it should be implemented in way more games, and it's way better than Genshin, which has like the pity reset whenever you hit a 5 star. So yeah, I do like the pity system. I also really like that characters and their cosmetics are not tied to their playstyle. So one of the problems in Genshin is that, or even Honkai or whatever, like you can really like a character's design, but you may not like their playstyle. Like, oh, I like Kaching in Genshin, but I want her to be just as good as Raiden Shogun. Well, in this game, you could technically give the kit of the Raiden Shogun to Kaching in Tower Fantasy, I guess. Like, oh, this character uses two pistols, but I don't really like the way that character looks. So I'll just put it on my character that I made or some other character. And yeah. So it kind of gives you the best of both worlds where you're using a really strong character or really strong gear without changing the look of your character or yeah, which I honestly kind of didn't like about Genshin. And now the bad. The game, Tower Fantasy, is very unpolished. What I've found about browsing the UI is that it's worse than Honkai. It's just as bad or worse than Honkai because it has a lot of menus that you have to go through and a lot of resources that you have to kind of deal with. Like there's like, whoa, what's the difference between the gold pulling material versus the red pulling material? Oh, what's the purple pulling material? And then like what are these tokens that you get for wishing on this specific banner? Oh, but like there's this other banner that like you gives you different tokens by pulling on them. Yeah, it's just very confusing. Another thing that's bad is the optimization of the game. The graphics, oh, it needs a lot of optimization because Genshin looks and runs better than Tower Fantasy, but TOF itself looks worse and runs a lot worse. Shadows in Tower of Fantasy deletes your frame rate. It cuts my frame rate from 60 to 45 or even 30 just because I don't know. Shadows shouldn't be that intensive, especially since the shadows aren't exactly detailed at all. Not to mention the awful texture streaming in this game. Textures take an incredibly long time to load, which also cuts your frame rate in half. Like you can go from 60 to 30 because it's loading textures in, and then it'll come back to 60. But in the meantime, while the game's trying to load the textures are loaded in, and it makes the game look really bad. Like it looks like the world is like pastel in clay just because there's no detail, and it's like it applies to everything, your clothes, other people's clothes, things on the table too can like be very blurry and does not look good. And the last thing about the graphics, motion blur in this game can be disabled. Even if you set it to very low, you can't really reduce the motion blur, or rather turn it off. And now the thing that I honestly can't deal with is the combat. The combat. is awful. There's there's no way of going around it. It's bad. The game doesn't feel responsive because things like dodging, like the Fantasia dodges, they're not triggered when you dodge an attack at the last second. They trigger when you dodge a second or two before the attack comes out, which genuinely feels awful. Like, as someone who's used to the Honkai timing of dodges, slightly looser than which is looser than Bayonetta's, but Bayonetta's is very tight. The dodging in this game is like confusing because sometimes you dodge and then you trigger Fantasia, which is great, but like, how did you trigger that in the first place? And then the second thing is that dodges don't give you iframes. So if there's a big monster and they're displaying the red circle that's filling up to let you know when the attack comes out, when you dodge out and you when you dodge out of the circle and you're clearly out of the circle and the attack initiates, you still get hit, which is incredibly incredibly frustrating. So if you're playing against really really strong enemies, you can't play risky, and your dodging isn't really a defensive tool you can rely on to get you out of a situation. No, it just ends up chunking you or killing you because you took a hit that you shouldn't have taken at all. And with the attacks, I feel like they're flashy and fast and they lack substance. It's hard to explain what I mean, but comparing it to stuff like Honkai, Genshin even, they just lack weight. They lack like they lack substance. Again, I don't know how to explain it, but the attacks don't feel good. They feel so weightless and odd. It's like the same issue I have with PGR, where PGR also is flashy and fast and also lacks substance. And yeah, they don't feel like they have any weight to them. But yeah, it's just, the attacks don't feel like anything. And finally, with the air attacking, it's not good. Air attacks, when you're in the air and you're pressing attack, they require so much stamina. So if you're a person using, say, a sword or a melee weapon, you'd like to be able to juggle your opponents in the air, but because of it using your stamina, you can't just constantly juggle them in the air, which is one of the good things that is fun to do. So you're gonna have to knock them up, maybe attack them in the air, and just go down, drop back down. It's like, it's not great. Not to mention, when you're pressing attack, uh, with some weapons you can tether to the opponent, which I assume is great on mobile, where you can't exactly do anything. I guess because you're running a, like, what a mid-range phone and stuff, and the game's incredibly slow just because of the unoptimization, and the tether allows you to just gap close to your opponent. But sometimes the tether doesn't even work that well because sometimes you tether and then you literally tether again. It's like, why? And not to mention, there's some enemies that are on, like, platforms, and if you tether to them, so you get trapped in the geometry of the platform. So even when you tether to them, you haven't gone anywhere. So, oh, you try to tether again. Oh, nope, nope, you're still where you are, and now you've just burned a lot of stamina. So now you have to go back down and replenish your stamina, which is really really annoying. And yeah, that's everything that I've found that's good and but mostly bad with Tower of Fantasy. Uh, is this game a Genshin killer? No, absolutely not. It, I don't think it can even compete with Genshin. The only thing that is the redeeming quality of Tower of Fantasy is, again, the characters not being tied to playstyles, which I genuinely think that's very very cool. But there's a lot of downsides, like the combat and a UI and the optimization, which honestly doesn't feel great. it lacks the same polish Genshin has, and if you're gonna try to compete with Genshin, which with basically this mediocrity, it's not even mediocre; it's literally subpar. But you're not gonna be able to compete with Genshin, which uh, the good thing that it does is that it's an MMO. So technically, if you want to be able to meet with with not new players, with players online, sure, that's okay, but like everything else about it is just isn't great. Like this game's combat feels worse than Punishing Grey Raven, and I think Punishing Grey Raven's combat suffers from the same issues, except even though Punishing Grey Raven's attacks are weightless and yeah, this the same thing, their dodges kind of actually work. But this game, their dodges don't work. So when PGR is like worse than say Genshin's combat and Honkai's combat by like a, by them being a cut above, uh, Tower of Fantasy ends up being a cut below or maybe two cuts below PGR, which is like bruh. Honestly, I don't know if the game will even last. Maybe it will last and or maybe it won't. But yeah, it's not going to compete with Genshin. This isn't a competitor. This is more of a sideshow to be honest. Of course, it's probably a good thing that they released the game before Sumeru because of course if Genshin released Sumeru, it would have to be competing with Genshin on their wet season it, unlike now, which is Genshin's dry season of content. So, yeah, it's Tower Fantasy is not competing. Eh, I bet you that ZZZ or Zenless Zone Zero may put the nail in the coffin for this game, because at this point, like, there's no one. I don't think there's anyone that can challenge the monopoly that MiHoYo has of current games, unfortunately, which allows them to pretty much be lazy. Although that's only for Genshin. Honkai, they're doing they're doing content. So I guess yeah. Oh yeah, but one last thing that I forgot to mention. Chests in this game, some of them are literally time gated. So if you know at the start of Genshin's release, everybody was like hunting for chests, get the primo gems, get the pulling stuff, gotta pull venti, whatever. And now in freaking Tower of Fantasy, when you go to a new area, a lot of the chests are time gated, which is like bruh. Like you want people to explore the world, but you lock the chests where they can't open them until tomorrow or whatever. That's stupid. That's honestly stupid. Who decided that? But yeah, that's gonna be it for me. If you stayed this far, thanks, and I'll see y'all next time.